Hi, I'm Ellen from the Chili Dog, and today I'm going to demonstrate how to use 5 different needle styles for small circumference knitting. Double pointed needles, flexible double pointed needles, 2 long circular needles, 1 long circular needle for the magic loop method, and a single short circular needle. Small circumference knitting is used for projects that are knit in the round and are generally less than about 16 inches around. And that is the length of the shortest standard circular needle on the market. Some common small circumference knitting projects are socks, mittens and gloves, infant or small child sized hats, sweater sleeves that are worked in the round, and even some bags or pouches. And I'm going to be demonstrating the process today with the knit knot bag that I'm currently working on. Small circumference knitting can be done with all of the most common knitting styles: English, continental, and Portuguese. It's not so much about how you fold and manage the yarn, but more about how you arrange and move your stitches on the different styles of knitting needles. So I'm going to start with double pointed needles, and this is the method that requires the most needles. Then I'll work down to the methods that only require a single needle. I placed 4 locking stitch markers evenly around my knitting, and that's to help you see how the fabric is going to be arranged on the needles as I'm knitting. This pink marker is at the beginning of my rounds. No matter which style of needle you're using, there are a couple of guidelines for small circumference knitting. First, it's knitting in the round. So you're going to work around and around and around the piece without turning things over as you would when you're knitting back and forth in rows. Second, small circumference knitting is almost always done with the right side facing, which just means that you're looking at the right side of your work as you knit. Let's get started. Knitting in the round on double pointed needles or DPNs begins by arranging your stitches evenly around either 3 or 4 needles. Most of the time, I prefer to arrange my stitches on 4 needles. This can be especially helpful for projects like sock patterns, where half of the stitches in a round are the top of the foot and the other half of the stitches are at the bottom of the foot. So with your stitches on 4 needles, knitting begins with the 5th needle. The right side of our work is facing us, and the round begins at this pink marker. So you begin knitting across the stitches of the first of the 4 needles. When I get to the end of that first needle, in whatever stitch pattern I'm using, you just slightly rotate your work to the next needle. You have a loose needle now, and that's the one you're going to knit across with. And now you just work around or work across the next needle. And it may look like I'm doing something kind of funny here at the end of each needle. And that's just because in my particular pattern, there's an increase at the end of the needle. It's nothing that you need to necessarily worry about. So once I get to the end of the second needle, the work is rotated so I can continue on across the third needle. Switch hands with that open needle. When I reach the end of the third needle, things get rotated, and it's time to work across the very last needle to the end of the round. At the end of the fourth needle, rotate again, and back to the beginning of my round, and I would continue on with the next round. Flexible DPNs are a relative newcomer to the knitting world. They look very similar to rigid DPNs with a needle tip on each end. The difference is this short, bendy cord between the two needles. That feature makes it possible for us to use just 3 needles for small circumference knitting instead of the 5 rigid DPNs. So this time, our stitches are arranged evenly onto 2 flexible DPNs, with half the stitches on one needle and half the stitches on the other. Then knitting begins with the third needle. We still have our right side facing, and this pink marker marks the beginning of our round. So we shift our stitches here down to the tip of the first DPN, and then we can go ahead and knit across the first DPN in pattern. At the end of my first needle, I happen to be making an increase because it's part of my pattern. You would just continue across that first needle in whatever pattern you need. So then I can shift the stitches that are on my new first needle to the center of the needle. Just rotate my work so that I can knit across the second flexible DPN and then switch hands with the loose needle. Shift those stitches down to the needle tip where I need to work. And then knit across that entire second needle. When I get to the end of that second needle, again, I can shift the stitches to the center of the needle so they're held out of the way and don't fall off either end. And then I would rotate my work and continue on with my next round. Using 2 sets of long circular needles for small circumference knitting is not widely popular, perhaps because circular needles just aren't sold in sets of 2. Just like with the flexible DPNs, stitches are going to be arranged evenly onto 2 needles. But instead of using a third needle to work your stitches, one needle tip is going to hold the stitches while you work with the other end of the same needle. Essentially, all of the stitches that are held here on the first needle will be worked with and remain on the first needle. All of the stitches that are held on the second needle will be worked with and remain on the second needle. We still have our right side facing, and this pink marker is the first stitch of the round. This is my first needle, so this is the only needle I'm going to use to work the first half of the stitches. I need to get my needle tip down to the end so that it's holding my stitches and they're ready to be worked. The second needle just kind of hangs here out of the way. I'm using the needle tip of this same circular needle to work across the first half of the round. And you just need to make sure here that that yarn is not caught in between your first needle and your second needle. When I get to the end of the first needle, I can pull the needle tip so that the stitches are resting on the cord. Then it's time to rotate the work, and it's time to work across that second needle. And for this method, again, you need to be a little bit careful that your yarn doesn't get caught and trapped in between the two needles. So I'm going to only use the second needle to work the second half of the stitches. I'll slide the needle tip down so that the stitches are ready to be worked. Use the other end of the same circular needle to knit across those stitches. And then begin knitting in whatever pattern you're using, just across the stitches on the second needle. When I get to the end of the second needle, I can slide the stitches down to the cord so that they are out of the way. Then it's time to rotate the work again and work the stitches for the next round, again, starting with this first needle and making sure that the stitches are knit and held all with the first needle. The magic loop method is kind of clever because it allows you to use a single, very long circular needle to knit around a circumference that's much smaller than the length of the needle. All of the stitches are mounted on the single needle, but then you need to divide them by pulling the cord at the center of the round. So find the center of my round, grab that cord and kind of bend it in half and pull the cord between those two stitches. So that basically divides our stitches in half. So as we're knitting, half of our stitches will be held on the cord and half of our stitches will be held on and worked with the needle tips. Again, the right side of my work is facing, and this pink marker is the beginning of the round. So I'm going to work across the first half of the stitches and push my needle tip in here so that the stitches are up at the tip and ready to be worked. Pull my other needle tip forward, and you can see the cord is shortening there on the other side. So the stitches that I'm going to work are held on the needle. The stitches on the other half of my knitting are just held here on the cord, and I have this little magic loop on the side and another magic loop on the other side. So I'm going to start knitting across the first half of the stitches. Try to get my loops down here so you can see what's happening with the cord on each side. I like to think of those cords as butterfly wings on each side of my knit. When I finish the first half of the stitches, you can see my butterfly wing here on the left has opened up, and I only have one on the right. My work gets rotated so that the right side stays facing. And then I need to shift my needles and cord around a little bit so that I can start knitting the second half of the round. So I'm going to pull on the cord at the left so that my stitches are held here on the needle tip, and I'm ready to start working. And as I'm doing that, I'm also going to pull the needle tip that I just finished knitting with out of the stitches so that those stitches that I completed are held on the cord. So again, as I work the second half of my stitches, they're held on the needle. I have a butterfly wing here on the left. The first half of the stitches are here held on the cord. And I have another butterfly wing as I start knitting with the needle that's in my right hand. So here's my second butterfly wing. Again, you need to be careful here with magic loop that your yarn does not get trapped in between your needle and your cord. Then funny stuff happens. When I finish my round, it's time to rotate things and shift the needle again. So I'm going to start by rotating, keeping the right side facing me. And then it's time to shift the needles to start the next round. So you can pull on the cord at the left so that one needle goes down to hold the stitches. And then pull on your needle tip at the right, or at the back rather, pull it to the right so that you can work with it. And then you can go ahead and start your next round. Finally, small circumference knitting can be done on a very short circular needle in much the same way that we knit larger projects in the round on longer circular needles. However, there is a limitation, and that's the length of the cord. All four of the other needle styles can be used to also knit extremely small circumferences. I'm talking about between 4 and 8 stitches in a round. When you use a single short circular needle, the circumference of your knitting needs to be close to the length of the needle. This could be problematic when you get to the toe of a sock or the fingers of a mitten or a glove where you're only knitting in around very few stitches. So when working on a short circular needle, all of the stitches are held on that single needle. If your needle tips are different lengths, like mine are here, and I'll pull it out so you can see I have one longer side and one shorter side, the stitches are going to be held on the shorter side, and you're going to use the longer side to form your new stitches. We still have our right side facing, and this pink marker marks the beginning of the round. So we can just go ahead and knit all the way around the entire circumference. I hope you enjoyed learning how to use DPNs, flexible DPNs, two long circular needles, one long circular needle, and even one short circular needle for small circumference knitting. It's really great to have so many different needle style options available so we can each choose which style is the most comfortable as we knit our favorite projects. If you'd like to try small circumference knitting and find your next favorite project, head over to the shop section of thechilidog.com and look for the Knit Knot bag. Until we stitch again, happy knitting!